there were some large spiders called banana spiders that I just see on their big webs between the trees and just sitting there. And there were, so there were all sorts of insects. And one of my companions found this giant centipede thing. The only encounters I had with wildlife there was the cockroaches, really, because they'd be in our house, and it wouldn't be unusual to go in the morning, take a shower, and there are 2 dead cockroaches in the bottom of the shower. But Jamaica has tons of fruit that grows locally, and it's the best fruit I've ever had. So, like their oranges, they look dirty on the outside, but they tasted amazing. And there were mangoes in my last area. There were mango trees everywhere, and we would just eat mangoes as snacks. And then the food they like to cook, they like rice and chicken a lot. In fact, I think McDonald's tried to start some franchises there, and they failed because the people don't really eat hamburgers. And there was one Burger King I knew of, but KFC did really well in Jamaica. So there's chicken products, and so one of the local dishes which they had very often and which I loved was called rice and peas. They're just rice, and then what they called peas were actually like kidney beans. So it's rice mixed with peas, various seasonings, these tiny, extremely spicy peppers, they called Scotch bonnets, and then coconut milk, and thyme, and they cooked that, I think, for several hours, but it was delicious, and so that was often served with either fried chicken, curry pork, or beef. And so, and beyond that, the food I had was pretty usual. So Jamaica had largely been Americanized, so when we went shopping, I could buy things I ate at home. The thing that surprised me the most about Jamaica was just all this fruit I'd never seen or heard of. So there's breadfruit, which grew on a tree. It is green on the outside, but when you cut it open, it's kind of yellow-brown, and you can fry it, and it tastes just like bread once it's cooked. And then there was another fruit called ackee. So it comes in these red pods, they call them ackee pods, and it has this yellow material around a little seed. And so if you pull out the yellow stuff and fry it, it tastes just like eggs. And then there were giant avocados. So I've had avocados in the States that are like the size of a fist, but there they were the size of a cantaloupe. And so one of the locals said, this is one of the few places in the world where bread and butter grows on the trees. So just because the avocados are so fatty, and they were delicious. I love avocados. And then other fruits, there were what they called star apples, and so they're kind of long. They looked a little like bananas on the outside, but if you cut them down the middle, they have a star shape in the middle, and they taste more similar to apples than anything else. And then there were also fruit they called jackfruit, and they were giant. So they would get larger than watermelons, and they grow right on the trunk of the tree. And those things were extremely sweet. You break them open, and they just have little sections, and you pull it out. It tastes like, the closest thing I can think of is Laffy Taffy. It's very sticky and sweet. And the sugar cane grew all over the place. and eating that, it was just like chewing on a piece of wood that had been soaked in sugar water. I guess another fruit I can think of is one that they called the star fruit, and it tasted really good, but the texture was kind of gross. So it is a big purple ball, and what you do to eat it is cut off the top, and then you just kind of squish the guts into your mouth, and then of course they had a lot of coconut there, and a common thing they did was take a coconut before it was ripe, and it just had water in the middle, and they would cut off the top, and kind of how they would refresh themselves. The taxis aren't really regulated, and the taxi drivers are paid by how many people they carry, so they usually stuff as many people as they can in a car. So that's just something I didn't expect. But so I mean, you sit in a car and then someone sits on top of you, and, but it wasn't that bad. And let's see, yes, I was never in a wreck, and no one I knew was in a wreck, but so the roads were usually quite narrow, at least in the areas where I served, and they would go 80 miles an hour down them, and they were good drivers. So I don't know, I guess my advice would be that you're generally in good hands, even though it's scary sometimes. I never served in Kingston, but it is a large city, and I can't remember the population. So the population of Jamaica as a whole is 2 million, and in Kingston had to have at least 100,000. So and Jamaica is a very mountainous island. It's a volcano island, and so Kingston kind of sprawled all these foothills, and I remember the mission president lived in one of the few richer areas, and it seemed like there were rich neighborhoods and then poor ones, and there wasn't really much in between. So there's quite a contrast, and most of the area was quite poor. Then I remember, I think it was my second day in Jamaica, we went to pick up some food, and it kind of shocked me because I had been spoiled by the American restaurants, and we went in, and so there's a counter, and then a menu like normal, and it's handwritten, and then we could see where they just had a little stove, and they were cooking rice and chicken on it, and they gave it to us in a little styrofoam dish, but it was just very simple, and yeah, that's really all I remember of Kingston. So I only went there when I arrived on the island, and then when I left, essentially. I guess before I say anything in it, let me preface those things. The mission president encouraged us not to speak patois, because for people who did not grow up speaking it, trying to speak it just makes you sound like you're 2 or 3. Like you don't sound very intelligent, and so but I understood it very well. So common phrases are greetings, like wagwan, which is, I guess, a big contraction of what's going on, and a common response was midea, which means I'm here, basically, like midehe. And then let's see, what other phrases, and then there were other words they had, like enough, they'd say a lot, which just means a lot. So one thing I remember, we taught a member, or we've made visits to a member who had a lot of kids, and people would say he has enough pickney, which just means he has a lot of kids. So, and then one phrase I heard someone say was "me hungry till me tribe dem all twist," and which just meant he was really hungry. I think the biggest issue was the law of chastity. So most of my mission I taught single mothers. They didn't really have expectations of getting married and raising a family. A lot of the men were more interested in just drinking and playing games. And then, so in Kingston, there were several suburbs of Kingston where gangs ruled, called Marysville and Trenchtown. So the cops didn't even go in there, and gangs just ran the whole place. And so the church doesn't send sister missionaries to Jamaica because it is dangerous. Outside the tourist areas, most of the people live in poverty. So that I think the country works quite hard to keep the tourist areas looking nice and presentable. But I taught a lot of people who lived in little, what they called tin shacks by the side of rail lines, where they could gather materials and things. So typically the temperature is between 75, 85 degrees, and it always stayed in that area night and day. It was very humid, and then it rained fairly frequently. The Jamaicans said there's a wet season and a dry season, but I don't know that I could tell the difference between the two. So, but when it rained, it rained hard and long. For days, it rained constantly and torrentially. And I remember so most of the people don't like going out in the rain, so they always thought we were crazy when we walked through the rain, and we didn't carry umbrellas because we rode bikes a lot. And then during one part of my mission, a hurricane came. So it was a lighter storm, as I heard. But we stayed in a house with, I think it was 2 other companion ships, so there's 6 elders in a house for 3 days. We didn't go out or teach, we were just holed up while it rained constantly, and the wind blew quite hard. They're kind of a more laid back culture, and just like if it happens, it happens. And when we ask people to come to church, they say, "Oh, God willing, I'll make it." And like most of them didn't care if we were late for appointments, or like if we showed up for an appointment. Like they weren't too concerned about exact times and things like that.